Look into the obsidian mirror and face the truth that the world has been trying to hide from you for so long. We explore the dark reflections of our society and the hidden beauty that lies within the shadows. Click subscribe now and see yourself in a completely new light.
Hospital discharged me on a Thursday afternoon, 11 days before they were supposed to. My white blood cell count had bounced back faster than the oncologist expected, and Dr. Halverson said he'd rather send me home than risk an infection from the ward. I didn't argue. I'd been staring at the same water-stained ceiling tile for 6 weeks, counting the cracks like they were going to tell me something I needed to know. My name is Hollis Beecher. I'm 63 years old. I drove a school bus for the Greene County District for 29 years before my wife passed, and after that I picked up part-time work at the hardware store on Route 9 just to have somewhere to be. My granddaughter Wren has lived with me since she was 9. Her mother, my daughter Charlotte, died of an overdose in a motel parking lot in 2021. There was no father in the picture, never had been, so it was me and Wren and a beagle named Pickle and a 2-bedroom ranch house on Sycamore Lane with a porch swing her grandmother had picked out the year before the cancer took her. Wren was 13 when the doctor found the lump in my colon. She was the one who drove me to the appointment, sitting in the passenger seat of my old Ford with her learner's permit tucked in her wallet and her hands clenched in her lap. She wasn't supposed to be driving alone yet, but she'd been doing it for months by then, running errands, picking up prescriptions. We didn't have anybody else. So when the discharge nurse asked who was picking me up, I told her my niece Marguerite would come. Marguerite is my late sister's daughter, 41, lives over in Bristol about an hour away. She'd been calling every week through the treatment, asking if I needed anything, offering to stay with Wren during the worst of the chemo. I'd let her come once for 10 days back in February when the second round knocked me flat. She'd been polite, quiet, took Wren shopping for a winter coat. I thought it was fine. She picked me up at 4 in the afternoon, smiled at the nurse, signed the paperwork, walked me to her Lexus. On the drive home, she talked about her real estate work and the new house she and her husband Brent were building over in Tennessee, near Knoxville, where the lots were cheaper and the property taxes were nothing. She said it twice. Property taxes are nothing. The sun was already low when we pulled into Sycamore Lane. I noticed Wren's bike wasn't on the porch. I noticed Pickle wasn't at the window. The porch light was off. Marguerite had her phone out before I'd even gotten my seatbelt undone. I asked her where Wren was. She said, "Uncle Hollis, let's get you inside first. You've had a long day." I didn't move. I asked again. She put the phone down in her lap. She had this look on her face like she'd been rehearsing, like she'd practiced in the mirror. "Wren is at a program," she said, "a residential program for grieving teens. I enrolled her 3 weeks ago. The chaplain at the hospital recommended it." I sat there. My hand was on the door handle and I couldn't move it. "What program?" I said. "It's called Cedar Hollow Renewal Center. It's in Henderson County, North Carolina. They have a wonderful track record with at-risk youth." She was struggling. "Hollis, you've been gone. You weren't seeing what I was seeing." I asked her where Pickle was. She said the dog was at a boarding kennel. She'd pay for it. It was no trouble. I made her drive me home and I made her leave. I told her I needed to be alone in my own house and she could come back tomorrow. She tried to argue and I just kept opening the door for her until she walked out. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my coat still on and I stared at the empty water bowl by the back door. There was a stack of mail on the counter. Marguerite had been opening it. Bills mostly. The hospital, the insurance, the property tax notice from the county. There was also a manila envelope from a lawyer's office in Bristol. I opened it. It was a petition for emergency temporary guardianship, filed 3 weeks ago. My niece was listed as the petitioner. The grounds were that I was incapacitated by serious medical treatment and unable to provide for a minor child. The court had granted it on a temporary basis pending a full hearing scheduled for June 4th. Today was May 22nd. There was also a copy of a document I had supposedly signed, an admissions agreement for Cedar Hollow Renewal Center. The signature was mine, or close enough to mine that I had to hold it up under the kitchen light to see that the H in Hollis curved the wrong way at the bottom. I sat there until the light in the kitchen window turned blue and then gray and then black. I didn't cry. I didn't call anybody. I just sat there. Around 11, I got up and walked to Wren's room. I hadn't been in there since I went into the hospital. The bed was made. Her school books were stacked on the desk. Her phone charger was still plugged into the wall, the cord coiled neatly, the way she did it. On the dresser was a photo of her grandmother and me at the Greene County Fair in 1998. Wren had taken it out of the album in the living room and put it there herself, the week after she came to live with me. I'd never moved it. I called the hospital chaplain at 7 the next morning. His name was Reverend Pell. I'd known him a little from when my wife was sick. I asked him if he'd recommended a place called Cedar Hollow Renewal Center to my niece. He went quiet for a long time. Then he said no. He'd never heard of it. He'd never spoken to my niece. He didn't know my niece. I told him what had happened. He said he'd make some calls. By 9, I was in the car. I had a folder on the passenger seat with the guardianship papers, the admissions agreement, my discharge documents from the hospital, my driver's license, Wren's birth certificate, and the court order from 2021 that made me her legal guardian after Charlotte died. I had a thermos of coffee and half a bottle of the painkillers they'd sent me home with. I didn't take any. I needed to be sharp. Henderson County is about 3 hours from where I live, down through the mountains. The drive was beautiful, which made me angry. I kept thinking about how Wren must have come down this same road in somebody else's car, watching the same hills go by, wondering where she was being taken. They probably didn't tell her. People who run places like that don't tell. Cedar Hollow Renewal Center is at the end of a 4-mile gravel road off Highway 64. There's a wooden sign at the entrance with a Bible verse burned into it, Proverbs 22,000, 6 times. Train up a child in the way he should go. The gate was open. I drove through. The main building was a converted farmhouse painted that flat colonial red you see all over Appalachia. Beyond it were 3 long barrack-style outbuildings and what looked like a greenhouse operation. 4 big polytunnels in a row, plus an open field with a chain-link fence around it. There were no other cars on the lot except a beat-up Suburban and a maroon pickup. I parked next to the pickup. A woman came out of the farmhouse before I'd even shut my door. Mid-50s, gray hair pulled back, denim jumper, sneakers. She had a clipboard. She introduced herself as Director Mirabel Strout and asked if I had an appointment. I told her I was Hollis Beecher and I was there for my granddaughter. The smile on her face didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. She said visits weren't permitted in the first 30 days. It was part of the program structure. Family disruption interferes with the healing process. If I wanted to schedule something, I could call the office on Monday. I handed her the folder, the guardianship order on top. I told her she had 2 choices. She could bring my granddaughter to me right now, or I could call the Henderson County Sheriff and the FBI and a lawyer I had on retainer, and we could do it the other way. I didn't have a lawyer on retainer. I'd never had a lawyer for anything other than my wife's estate, but I said it the way my father used to say things when he meant them, and Director Strout's mouth got small. She told me to wait in the office. I told her I was coming with her. She started to argue, and I just started walking past her, and she followed me, talking fast, saying I didn't understand the program, saying Wren had signed her own intake forms, saying she was making real progress. The greenhouse was the second tunnel from the left. The plastic was foggy from the humidity inside. A man in a green polo shirt opened the door for the director when she nodded at him. The heat hit me in the face like a wall. There were maybe 20 kids in there. Boys and girls, all ages from about 12 to 17, working in rows. They were thinning seedlings, transplanting, pulling weeds out of the long planting beds. Nobody was talking. Nobody looked up. They wore matching gray t-shirts with the Cedar Hollow logo on the chest. They were soaked through with sweat. I saw her in the 3rd row from the back. She'd cut her hair, or somebody had cut it for her. It used to be down past her shoulders. Now it was just below her ears, uneven, hacked off. She was on her knees in the dirt, pulling something out of the soil with her bare hands. Her hands were stained brown and red where the dirt had ground into the cuts. Her arms were thinner than I remembered. The t-shirt hung on her. I said her name. She didn't look up. I think she thought she was imagining it. I said it again. She turned her head, slowly, like she didn't trust herself. Her eyes found me, and for a second I watched her face try to understand what it was seeing. Then she made a sound I don't have a word for, a sound that wasn't a word, and she got up off her knees and she ran at me. She hit me hard enough that I almost went down. The cancer had taken about 30 pounds off me and she'd grown in 3 weeks. Taller maybe, sharper at the elbows. She held on to my coat with both fists and pressed her face against my chest, and she just shook. She didn't cry at first. Just shook. She didn't cry at first. Just shook. I put one hand on the back of her head, on that hacked-off hair, and I said, "I'm here. I'm taking you home." She said, "Grandpa, they told me you signed me away. They said you didn't want me anymore. They said you were dying and you didn't want me to see it." I felt something break inside me that I don't think has ever fully healed back. I said, I would never in my whole life. She started crying then, the kind of crying that comes out of a place a 13-year-old shouldn't even know about yet. I looked up. Director Strout was standing in the doorway of the greenhouse with a man in the green polo behind her. The other kids were watching now. 20 pairs of eyes. Nobody moved. I said to the director, "Get her things." She said there were procedures. I said, "Get her things or I'll leave them." But she's walking out of here with me right now. The man in the polo took a step forward and Ren flinched against me and I put my arm across her, behind me, and I looked at him and I said something I have never said to another man in my life. I said, "You touch her, I will end you." He stopped. Director Strout said something about calling the sheriff. I told her she should. I said I'd wait. I said I'd love nothing more than for the Henderson County Sheriff to show up and hear about how she was operating an unlicensed residential facility on the basis of a forged admissions agreement. I held up the folder. I'd never raised my voice. I wasn't raising it now. She got Ren's things. A plastic grocery bag with the clothes my granddaughter had been wearing when she arrived. Her phone, dead, a library book she'd been reading the night I went into the hospital, with a Cedar Hollow stamp on the inside cover where they'd taken it from her. No shoes other than the work boots they'd issued her. I let her keep the boots. We walked to the car. Ren held my hand the whole way. She was 13 and she held my hand like she was 4 years old, and the boots scuffed in the gravel, and she didn't let go even when I had to dig in my coat pocket for the keys. In the passenger seat, before I started the engine, she looked up at the road we'd just come down. She said, "Grandpa, there's a man watching us." I looked. There was a man in a windbreaker standing at the corner of the farmhouse with a phone in his hand. He was filming us. I took out my own phone and I filmed him right back. He went inside. I started the engine. I drove the 4 miles of gravel road slower than I needed to, because Ren kept looking out the back window, and I wanted her to see for herself that nothing was following us. When we hit the highway, I rolled the windows down, and the cold mountain air came in, and Ren put her head against the headrest and closed her eyes and let it move her hair around. She fell asleep before we reached the state line. I drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand on her wrist, just feeling her pulse, just making sure. We got home a little after 7. Pickle was still at the kennel. I called from the driveway and the boy who answered said they were closed, but he'd wait for me. I drove to the kennel, and Ren came in with me, in those work boots, and when the beagle saw her, he made a noise I'd never heard a dog make before, and Ren sat down on the floor of the lobby and let him climb all over her. The next day was a Friday. I called a lawyer in Greene County, a woman named Adrienne Cosgrove who'd been recommended to me by Reverend Pell. She came to the house. She looked at the petition for guardianship and the admissions agreement, and she didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Mr. Matta, Beecher, this is going to be a long road, but we are going to walk it." The forensic document examiner came up from Knoxville the following Tuesday. He confirmed the signature on the admissions agreement was a forgery. The signature on the guardianship petition was also forged, including the notary stamp, which traced back to a notary in Bristol who had not actually been present when the document was signed. That notary, when contacted, said Marguerite had told her it was a power of attorney for a property closing and had paid her in cash. The Henderson County Sheriff opened an investigation into Cedar Hollow Renewal Center the same week. It turned out they had 19 children on the property. 11 of them had been enrolled by people other than their custodial parents. 3 had been enrolled by step-parents whose consent forms didn't legally authorize residential placement. 1 had been enrolled by an aunt who had told the parents the child was at a church youth retreat. The state of North Carolina shut the facility down on June 12. Director Mirabelle Strout was charged with 16 counts ranging from false imprisonment to child endangerment to operating without licensure. The man in the green polo, whose name turned out to be Granger Holloway, was charged separately with assault on a minor based on testimony from 3 of the boys. My niece Marguerite was charged in Greene County with forgery, identity theft, and filing a false court document. Her husband Brent, who I later learned had been the one who found Cedar Hollow online and convinced her this was a smart play while I was in the hospital, was charged as a co-conspirator. The motive came out at the bail hearing. They'd been planning to petition for permanent guardianship of Wren in the June 4th hearing. With permanent guardianship would come control of the small trust my wife had set up before she died, plus access to a piece of land in Tennessee my mother had left to me and Charlotte jointly back in 1998, which would pass to Wren if I died. Marguerite and Brent were not building a house in Knoxville with money they had. They were building it on borrowed money against an inheritance they expected to control. I sat in the courtroom for the sentencing. Adrienne Cosgrove sat next to me. Wren did not come. We'd decided together that she didn't need to see her cousin in handcuffs. Marguerite was sentenced to 4 years on the forgery counts and another 2 on the child endangerment charge to run consecutively. Brent got 5. The judge, a woman named Honorable Patricia Linwood, looked at Marguerite over her glasses and said, "Mrs. Tilburn, you violated not only the law but the trust of a man recovering from cancer and a child who had already lost her mother. The court takes no pleasure in this sentence, but it takes no apology in it either." Marguerite did not look at me. She had not looked at me once in 9 months of proceedings. I went home that day and I made grilled cheese sandwiches for Wren and me. She likes hers with a slice of tomato in the middle, which her grandmother used to do for her when she was small, and which I had forgotten about for a long time. We ate on the porch swing. Pickle was asleep on the boards by our feet. The sun was going down over the line of oaks at the back of the property. I'm not going to pretend everything's fine. It isn't. Wren has nightmares about once a week. She has a therapist now, a woman named Dr. Marlo Pace, who specializes in trauma in adolescence and who has been worth every dollar I've paid her. And that has been a lot of dollars. There are weeks when Wren is the girl she used to be, sharp and funny and asking me questions about everything, and there are weeks when she goes quiet and stays in her room and I just leave her there and put a sandwich outside her door at lunchtime. She came back from Cedar Hollow with a scar on her left forearm she won't talk about and a habit of flinching when somebody comes up behind her too fast. The therapist says it will fade. Some of it. Slowly. I'm in remission. The cancer is gone, for now. I have a scan every 3 months and so far the news has been good. I went back to the hardware store on Route 9 in September on a reduced schedule because the manager, a man named Ledger Tompkins, said he'd been holding my apron for me the whole time. I work 2 days a week. Wren comes in after school sometimes and does her homework at the counter, and Ledger pretends not to notice when she eats handfuls of the candy out of the bowl by the register. In October, Wren and I drove down to Henderson County one more time. I don't know why. Maybe I needed her to see it from the outside. The gravel road was the same. The farmhouse was boarded up. There was a state notice on the door, and the greenhouses were empty, the plastic sagging on the frames, weeds growing through where the planting beds used to be. We stood in the parking lot for about 10 minutes and didn't say anything. On the drive home, she fell asleep again, the way she had that first day. And I drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand on her wrist, just feeling her pulse, just making sure. When we pulled into Sycamore Lane, the porch light was on. I'd left it on when we left that morning on purpose because I wanted to come home to a lit house. Pickle was at the window. Wren woke up and looked at the porch and said, "Grandpa, can we get pizza tonight?" I said yes. She said, "With the pepperoni on top, not under the cheese. You always order it with the pepperoni under the cheese, and that's wrong." I said, "With the pepperoni on top." She said, "Promise?" I said, "I promise." And we went inside. I think about that gravel road sometimes. The 4 miles between the highway and the farmhouse. The way the trees closed in on both sides. The way the light went green and dim under the canopy. I think about how my granddaughter rode down that road in somebody else's car, not knowing where she was being taken, And I think about how every door that closed on her between Sycamore Lane and Cedar Hollow was a door that an adult had opened. A notary who didn't ask questions, a judge who signed a temporary order without a hearing, a director who took cash and didn't verify a signature, my niece who looked me in the face for 41 years and then decided I was worth more to her dead than alive. Causes have effects. That's the part nobody can argue with. Marguerite did not wake up one morning and decide to steal a child. She made 100 small decisions over a long time, and each one was easier than the one before it. And by the time she signed my name to that admissions form, she had already convinced herself it was the smart thing. The greenhouse in Henderson County did not appear out of thin air. Mirabelle Strout built it slowly, with the help of every person who looked the other way. The damage to my granddaughter was not done by one monster. It was done by a chain of ordinary people who chose the comfortable thing instead of the right thing. What I want my granddaughter to learn from this, more than anything, is that her grandmother and I raised her to be the kind of person who breaks that chain. Not the kind who closes the next door, the kind who refuses. There is a quiet courage in being the one notary who asks the extra question. There is a quiet courage in being the cousin who calls the sheriff instead of cashing the check. We do not get to choose how the world tests us, but we get to choose what we do when the test comes. I am 63 years old, and I have spent most of my life believing that strength meant doing the work and keeping your mouth shut. I was wrong about half of that. The work, yes. But silence is what builds places like Cedar Hollow. Silence is what put my granddaughter's hands in that dirt. If I had been stronger about asking the right questions earlier, about who Marguerite really was, about why she suddenly cared so much, my granddaughter would not flinch when somebody walks up behind her too fast. So I tell her now, sitting on the porch swing in the evenings, that her mind is the most valuable thing she owns, that she should question kindness that comes too fast, and authority that asks too much, that when something feels wrong in her chest, that feeling is information and she should trust it. I tell her that endurance is not silence. It is the choice to keep loving people honestly, even after dishonest people have hurt you. It is the choice to come back again and again to the porch light you left on for yourself. We are still here. The light is still on.